The morning began with laughter, not joy, but the kind of laughter that hides disbelief and pride. Beyond the cold shimmer of the barbed wire, a group of German prisoners gathered, their breath forming white clouds against the Arkansas dawn. On the other side of the fence, American guards stood over an open fire, iron pans set atop makeshift stoves, the smell of breakfast already beginning to drift. They watched as strips of bacon sizzled and curled, the fat popping in small bursts of light. A corporal named Franz Keller muttered under his breath, "They live on grease. No wonder they move so slowly." His comrades chuckled. A sergeant added, "Real soldiers eat black bread and sausage." This, he gestured toward the pan, "is an insult to food." The group laughed again, louder this time, their mockery rising above the wind that carried the first faint scent of smoke. But beneath the laughter lingered something else, a flicker of curiosity. None of them had eaten meat cooked in months. In Stalag 17A, before their transfer, they had survived on watery soup and moldy bread. Here, in America, they were surrounded by things they didn't understand, electric lights that never went dark, towns that smelled of gasoline instead of gunpowder. And now, soldiers frying meat just because it was morning. The fire hissed louder, the bacon crackled and spit, and a wave of aroma rolled outward like a slow tide. The Germans fell quiet for a moment, almost involuntarily. One of them, a mechanic from Hamburg named Otto, frowned as if listening for something beneath the sound. "How much fat do they waste?" he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. The guards didn't look at them. They flipped the bacon calmly, laughing about baseball scores and a letter from home. One young American, Private Miller, pulled a piece of bacon from the pan with his fingers, blew on it, and ate it without a word. To the Germans, the sight was almost unbearable, the casual luxury of it, the unspoken message that hunger was a thing conquered, not feared. The prisoners' barracks stood just 50 yards away, a collection of wooden buildings built in neat, perfect rows, even in captivity. The order of American efficiency pressed down on them. Behind those walls lay bunks lined with blankets, not straw, a stove that actually burned through the night, and a camp kitchen that began its work before sunrise, the smell of frying meat seeping through every crack of their disbelief. Franz tried to keep the mockery alive. "Grease eaters," he said, forcing a grin. "We'll see how long they last when the fat runs out." But no one laughed this time. The laughter had already begun to fade, melting like frost under the warmth of something unfamiliar. A crow cawed above the camp, and the echo of it stretched across the quiet field. Smoke drifted through the fence, weaving through coils of barbed wire. It carried with it a scent that none of them could ignore. The soldiers looked at one another, their faces caught between disdain and something softer, a reluctant hunger. If you value stories like this, the narrator's voice fades in, steady and low. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. Then, the screen darkens slightly as the narrator continues, inviting viewers to share their own time and place in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are. The fire crackles again, the smell deepens, and the laughter of the prisoners dies completely. The camera lingers on the iron pan, on the golden brown edges of bacon curling into smoke. This was the morning when arrogance began to tremble. The next morning began almost the same way, the same gray light spreading across the Arkansas fields, the same mist hanging above the camp, and the same clang of pans from the American side. But this time, there was no laughter inside the fence. The German POWs gathered again, pretending to be uninterested. They spoke of home, of missing cigarettes, of rumors that Berlin still held firm. Yet their eyes, every one of them, shifted toward the kitchen area where the American cooks worked over their stoves. The sound came first, that unmistakable hiss, like raindrops falling on a hot road. Then came the smoke, thin and blue at first, curling upward before the breeze caught it and carried it straight toward the prisoners. Within seconds, the air changed. The sharp, savory scent of bacon-rich, oily, faintly sweet slid through the fence like a ghost. Franz Keller froze mid-sentence, his breath caught, his mouth half open. The same man who had mocked so loudly the day before now looked dazed, as though a forgotten instinct had just been awakened. The smell. He whispered, it's not what I expected." A few others laughed awkwardly, but their voices were quieter this time, edged with discomfort. The camp's usual noises, hammers from the workshop, boots in the mud, shouts from the guards seemed to fade into the distance. For a few moments, there was only the sound of the sizzling fat and the crackle of fire. Otto, the mechanic from Hamburg, turned toward the wind as if to catch more of it. He didn't speak. His eyes closed for a moment, and something old flickered across his face. Memory, maybe, or longing. On the other side of the fence, Private Miller noticed the sudden quiet. He glanced up briefly, his expression unreadable, then returned to his pan. He dropped another strip of bacon onto the iron surface, and the sound filled the cold morning air like a song. The camp's commanding officer, Lieutenant Harper, stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets. He had seen this before, how the simplest things could unsettle men who thought themselves unshakable. You can't argue with hunger, he'd once told his sergeant. It's the one language everyone understands. The Germans, though proud and disciplined, could feel it too. The smell worked its way past their defenses, stirring not only appetite but emotion. For years, propaganda had told them Americans were weak, wasteful, mechanical. But here, in this unexpected battlefield of breakfast, the enemy seemed almost impossibly human, laughing, eating, sharing warmth. The camera shifts slowly across their faces, young, unshaven, eyes hollowed by distance. Their uniforms, once symbols of power, now looked like costumes from a dying world, and all the while, the smoke kept rising, steady and hypnotic. Franz tried to speak again, perhaps to recover his authority, but his words came out thin. "They eat like pigs," he said. Though his tone lacked conviction, no one replied. The others were still watching the pan, their breath fogging in the cold air. The wind shifted again, and the smell grew stronger, thicker, almost unbearable. One prisoner, a quiet carpenter from Dresden, muttered, "My wife used to fry ham on Sundays." The sentence slipped out before he could stop it. A few heads turned, surprised, but no one mocked him. There, in that suspended silence, something invisible changed. The line between captor and captive blurred, not in politics or surrender, but in scent and memory. The camera lingers on the smoke drifting upward, dissolving into the sky. The narrator's voice returns, calm but resonant. "Sometimes," he says, "the first surrender in any war begins not with defeat, but with the scent of something we once loved." The screen fades slowly to black. Winter pressed down on Camp Chaffee, Arkansas, on January 5th, 1945, the kind of morning when frost glittered on the gravel between barracks and breath hung like pale thread in the air. The first scent rose before the bugle, the faint edge of salt and smoke passing through the cracks of the wooden walls. Stomachs answered faster than pride. No laughter reached the yard this time. Boots scraped, blankets folded, tin cups waited in a line that formed itself without orders. Hunger had become the camp's second language. The Geneva Standard meant full rations on paper, close to a soldier's portion. But winter found every man counting each spoon of oatmeal, each slice of bread, each hint of fat. Inside Barracks 12, Franz Keller sat with his back against the stove that never seemed hot enough, his mind fixed on the hiss he could not see. Across from him, Otto traced a circle in the frost on the window, then stopped, as if ashamed of wanting to inhale what drifted beyond the frame. Outside, the kitchen crew worked with mechanical calm, pans set early, fire steady, coffee urns breathing a low metallic sigh. A guard passed with an enamel mug, and the smell of chicory rose for a heartbeat. A tiny gossip of civilian life carried into uniformed routine. Someone mentioned hearing a stateside figure, a bomber an hour at the big plant far to the north. And the thought was both absurd and logical in this country where even mornings felt mass-produced. The comparison landed hard. If a machine could roll out a B-24 in 63 minutes, then surely a kitchen could make enough bacon to scent an entire camp before sunrise. The barracks settled into a wordless pact. Eyes followed the smoke through the gaps in the boards. The body spoke in small betrayals. A swallow, a tightening in the jaw, fingers flexing as if around an invisible fork. Pride tried to hold the line, but it thinned with every breath. A whisper of argument flickered near the door, one man insisting that German rye and cured ham were stronger food for stronger people, another answering nothing at all, only staring toward the kitchen with a look that admitted defeat without saying it. In a pocket notebook, Keller marked the date in a sentence he would not read aloud. Hunger now keeps time better than the camp clock. He closed the cover quickly, as if the page itself could betray him. 2 bunks down. Otto thought of the Hamburg dock front before the raids, a Saturday market smell of smoke and salt, and the memory startled him with its warmth. The scent beyond the fence no longer belonged to an enemy. It belonged to mornings that had not yet learned the language of sirens. Roll call broke the stillness, and men formed ranks by habit. Steam rose from the kitchen roof in a straight white column that looked almost ceremonial. In that moment, the camp felt paused, as if a hand had pressed a finger to the world and asked it to hold still. Hunger had done what lectures, leaflets, and loudspeakers could not. It had reached across wire and uniforms and taken the edge off contempt, not with logic, but with the oldest persuasion a human being can feel. The part closed on the smallest sound, not the bugle, not the order, but the delicate pop of fat in a pan, a tiny metronome for a winter morning in captivity. Snow had begun to fall across Arkansas that February, soft flakes drifting down over the guard towers and the long straight rows of barbed wire. The mornings came slower now, wrapped in silence and fog. Inside Barracks 9. Otto lay awake before dawn, staring at the rafters above him. The scent would come soon. He knew the rhythm now, and with it something he could not explain, something heavier than hunger. When the first hiss of the pans reached him, he closed his eyes. The smell that followed was the same, yet different. It carried warmth, smoke, and something else, a memory. He saw his father again, sitting by the window in Bremen, pipe in hand, sunlight glinting through the frost on the glass. He remembered the small sound of a pan from the kitchen, the laughter of his mother, and the smell of cured ham that filled the house on quiet mornings before the war. For a moment, the wooden barracks melted away, and he was home. A shout from outside broke the illusion. Guards were preparing the work crews. The prisoners moved out, boots crunching over snow, carrying shovels and tools. Today's assignment was simple help repair a nearby fence and clear ice from the farm road leading to the supply barns. It was work that froze fingers and numbed thought. But for many, it was better than sitting inside remembering what they had lost. The convoy that picked them up was a battered line of trucks, each painted olive drab with a white star on the side. Franz and Otto climbed aboard, sitting among 15 others, their breath clouding the air. The truck rumbled through the small Arkansas town nearby, past red barns and grain silos, the countryside stretching wide and endless. In the fields, they saw something that stunned them every time: American farmers working tractors as big as tanks, machines that plowed through frost like it was sand. At the Miller farm, a coincidence of name, they thought with irony they were handed tools and put to work. The farm's owner, Mr. Raymond Miller, was a tall man in his 40s, his coat lined with shearling, his hands cracked from years of labor. He didn't speak much to the prisoners, but neither did he glare at them. His wife, Helen, appeared later, bringing a basket of food for the Americans watching the work, when the guards weren't looking. She pulled a small paper bag from her apron, its top rolled tight. She walked toward the fence and, without a word, handed it to the nearest prisoner, a young boy from Cologne named Dieter, who couldn't have been more than 19. Inside were 3 strips of bacon, still warm, wrapped in a napkin. Dieter looked up, startled. Helen only smiled faintly and said, "Don't waste it." Then she turned and walked back to the farmhouse. The prisoners froze, not daring to move. Even the guards looked uncertain. Dieter hesitated, then tore the first strip in half and offered it to Franz beside him. Franz stared for a long moment before taking it. The taste was sharp, smoky, and impossibly real. It wasn't just food, it was proof that the world beyond their wire still contained kindness. By noon, word had spread quietly through the camp. The farmer's wife. They whispered, she gave them bacon. It became the gossip of the day, passed from bunk to bunk, not as scandal, but as wonder. Something about the act seemed to thaw the air inside the barracks. That night, Otto wrote in his small notebook, "Today, I ate what they call bacon. I remember my mother's kitchen. For the first time, the smell did not hurt." The narrator's voice lowers as the scene fades into evening. "In every war," he says, There are gestures too small for history books' moments that slip between pages but remain alive in memory, sometimes. All it takes is a single shared meal to begin rebuilding the human heart. Snow keeps falling, the smoke from the kitchen rising again like a fragile bridge between two worlds. The letters began in the thaw of March 1945 at Camp Chaffee, Arkansas. After dawn roll call, the men lined up at a rough table near the barracks, where paper envelopes and a small bottle of ink waited under the eye of a young sergeant. Franz Keller wrote slowly about the morning scent that had silenced the yard. He did not use the word bacon. He wrote instead about smoke that tasted of salt on the air and about a kindness he could not name. Otto folded his sheet with care and added a line about work crews on farm roads and the sound of tractors in frost that did not stall. By midday, the letters moved to the sensor shack, then to an army post office bag on a truck for the rail spur north. From there, they joined crates of mail bound through New York by early April and onward to neutral hands that would route them toward Bremen and Hamburg if the route still existed. Numbers shadowed every sentence. Across the United States, there were more than 500 branch camps by spring of 1945. The total number of German prisoners held on American soil reached 371,683 by war's end. On the radios that guards kept near the kitchen, the men often heard a claim from Michigan that a B-24 could roll off the line in 63 minutes at Willow Run in 1944. The prisoners repeated this in their letters as a fact they struggled to believe. In the mess hall, the posted ration chart promised near 3,000 calories per day in accordance with the Geneva Articles. The men counted each spoon and wrote that the chart was real and that it felt like an argument they were losing with their own pride. Rumor moved as fast as the mailbags. In early April, the camp bulletin listed a Red Cross inspection for the 10th, and the kitchen responded with a crisp routine that could be seen from the yard. Tin trays washed in lines, coffee urns steaming from before sunrise. The bacon pans started earlier than usual, and the scent crossed the fence before the bugle. Keller noted in his pocketbook that the smell reached Barracks 12 at 5:35 in the morning, and he drew a single line to mark it. He did not trust words for this. The diary of a clerk from Dresden recorded that the farm detail had paused at a fence line while an American woman slid a lunch sack through the wire. He wrote that his hands shook when he ate because winter finally felt like it was ending. On April 12, the radio announced the death of President Roosevelt. The guards removed their caps. The camp fell into a hush that was different from hunger. That night, the letter room filled again for the last pickup of the week. Otto wrote that the kitchen smoke rose as steady as a chapel candle. He ended with a question to his father. If a morning can soften a man without a single word, what else have we misunderstood? I want to hear from you. Which line in this day would you have written home about? The scent in the yard? The ration chart? The silence when the radio spoke of a death? Another question for you. If you stood at this fence in April 1945, what detail would stay with you 20 years later? May 1945. The radios in the guard towers no longer played bulletins of battles, but long strings of unfamiliar names: Remagen, Ruhr, surrender. In the barracks, the news moved faster than paper. Germany was finished. The flags had fallen, yet the camp remained, suspended between past and future. The men gathered near the fence, watching the same kitchen fires that still burned each morning. Smoke still rose, carrying the same smell that had once mocked them, then fed them, and now seemed to haunt them. Franz Keller sat at a wooden table near the window of Barracks 12, staring at his hands. Once they had been a soldier's hands, certain of purpose. Now they were calloused from farm work and splintered wood, and he wondered what they had ever defended. Across the room, Otto's notebook lay open beside a cold cup of coffee substitute. He had written only one line that morning. The war ended inside before it ended outside. Arguments broke out in low voices. Some of the men still wore their old pride like armor, speaking of returning to rebuild a new Germany with discipline and order. Others stared at the floor, silent, knowing that the old Germany had consumed itself. The tension rose not from politics now, but from shame and confusion. In one corner, a young prisoner named Dieter said quietly, "They will not want us back. We are ghosts already." At breakfast, the Americans served bacon again. The same sound filled the air, the hiss, the soft crack of fat in the pan, but now it meant something else. The smell drifted across the camp, no longer as temptation, but as symbol. to some. It smelled of freedom, to others, of defeat. Yet no one could deny its power. The men who once laughed at it now watched with quiet reverence. Their heads bowed slightly as if in ritual. A sergeant reading the morning orders broke the silence. "You'll be going home soon," he said. "Maybe a month." The announcement did not bring cheers. Instead, it felt like the ground shifting under their feet. Going home. What did that mean? When home was rubble, when the streets they remembered might not exist. Later that night, Keller sat outside the barracks. The air was still, and the sky stretched wide with unfamiliar stars. The smell of bacon still lingered faintly from dinner. He thought of how it had followed them through every season, from arrogance to surrender, from hunger to humility. A single scent that had outlasted the Reich. He whispered to Otto, who sat beside him. "It's strange. The first thing we mocked became the thing that stays." Otto nodded slowly. "Maybe that's how people change. One smell, one kindness at a time." The narrator's voice fades in over the sound of crickets. "Every empire falls with a roar," the voice says. "But sometimes hearts change with a whisper. In the camps of Arkansas and Texas, of Kansas and Oklahoma, thousands of men discovered that the world they fought against was not made of hatred, but of small, human mornings of smoke, of bread, of bacon shared without words." A pause follows, long enough for the audience to breathe. And now, a question for you. If you had stood inside that camp on the morning of surrender, what would you have smelled? Victory, shame, or simply the smoke of something human that refused to die? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The camera lingers on the camp at dusk, smoke curling lazily upward until it fades into stars. September 1945 set the camp in motion. Orders came down for repatriation details, and the yard filled with inventory lines, blankets, canteens, duffels, Red Cross parcels. The morning bacon still hissed in the pans, but now it sounded like a clock running out. At dawn, muster the men learned their route east by rail Arkansas to St. Louis, then through Indiana and Ohio toward the Atlantic ports. The kitchen smoke trailed above the barracks while freight cars clanked into place, a practical rhythm replacing months of ritual hunger. The journey unfolded in measurable steps. Boxcars with benches and a drum stove rolled past bare fields and towns where factory stacks made their own weather. A supply sergeant noted the mileposts and the schedule pinned to the car wall. 8 minutes allowed for water, 15 for rations, 30 for siding delays. In Cleveland's switchyard, the prisoners watched steel mills that glowed like furnaces from a different planet. A reminder of production numbers they had collected like talismans, a bomber every 63 minutes at Willow Run the year before. Over 500 branch camps on American soil by that spring. Rations calculated near 3,000 calories per day, even in winter. A total of 371,683 German POWs processed before the war closed. Each statistic felt less like triumph or humiliation now, and more like a ledger of reality that had outlived slogans. At Camp Kilmer in New Jersey, medical checks and paperwork stacked into evening. A chaplain moved along the line, speaking softly with men who kept their eyes on the floor. The harbor beyond was a forest of masts and funnel smoke. Liberty ships and troop transports waited under cranes that swung like metronomes. On October 2nd, 1945, embarkation orders posted at sunrise. By noon, the ramps began to rattle. The sea air carried salt that tangled with a familiar note drifting from a dockside mess tent. Someone was frying breakfast for a crew coming off night duty, and for a breathless instant, the scent of bacon threaded through diesel and tar. The crossing was cold and slow. Atlantic swells lifted the bow and set the men to remembering tractors that never stalled. A farmer's wife who slid a warm paper sack through wire. A radio reporting the death of a president, and a camp that removed its caps in unison. On deck, Franz Keller stood beside Otto as gulls wheeled over gray water. Neither spoke. The arithmetic of the last year had already been done, pride subtracted, hunger multiplied, certainty divided. The remainder, something pliable with a human shape. Bremen's port wore its wounds openly when the ship finally eased past breakwater lights. Rubble shouldered the streets where markets once breathed. Yet morning still arrived. In a courtyard near the cathedral, a woman bent over a tin pan on a spirit stove, turning a thin slice of cured meat that cracked faintly as it met heat. Smoke rose in a narrow ribbon. Keller paused in the road with his duffel at his feet and stood very still. The scent moved through the ruined air like a thread pulled from another life. A reminder that the war had ended not only in documents and parades, but in kitchens where people tried again to begin. The scene closed with ordinary movements, a door opening, a chair placed in weak sun, a pan lifted from flame. Over all of it, the thin white veil of morning smoke drew a line between the world that had once laughed at Greece and the one that now understood why a small warmth could stop an entire camp. History often leaves behind the loudest fragments, the columns of fire and the shout of victory. Yet, what endures in memory is softer and more precise, a sensory seam that does not tear with time. Across the months of captivity, the men learned a language without grammar, a sequence of mornings that undermined certainty with the patient logic of smell, warmth, and routine. The numbers remain important, because scale was the stage hundreds of camps mapped across a continent, hundreds of thousands processed and fed and worked, factories beating minutes into machines. But the change did not happen where ledgers were kept. It happened at the fence line, at the mess window. At the moment, a hand extended a plate without a speech. It is tempting to call the transformation accidental, yet every ordinary act required effort. Coal shoveled at 4 a.m., a cook lighting his stove on time, a guard choosing to look the other way for a heartbeat while kindness crossed wire. Years later, an old man might forget the name of a rail junction or the order of a convoy, but he will remember the crisp sound that fat makes when it meets iron, and the way silence spread through a yard when hunger ceased to be something that needed explanation. In that fragile hush, a belief system loosened, not with debate, but with recognition that the enemy possessed kitchens, mornings, laughter, grief, and the stubborn wish that the day begin without malice. What remains, therefore, is not an argument, but an image. Smoke lifting into pale air, carrying salt and sweetness beyond fences and uniforms, binding strangers into a minute of shared attention. It is a small image, and that is its strength, because history is made livable by small images that people can carry alone. Somewhere a pan still warms, a window still fogs, a hand still pauses over a plate. The world measures progress in engines and treaties. The heart measures it in the moment when a scent can stop a camp, and a morning can make room for something gentler to survive.